and so far you've succeeded in getting a community interest company established, and you're hoping to move that forward to an institute.
Yes, that's right.
So I'm going to hand over to Keith, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to start off, or probably half of my talk is going to be about my own experiences involved in metal detecting, history and archaeology, because everything that I'm trying to do with the institute, or the proposed institute, comes back to my own sort of principles of how I see metal detecting being useful as part of the archaeological team going forward in the future. So, but it's actually best for me just to explain quickly, actually, that I've put down there working towards an education and research institute. I've been working on this for nearly 2 years now, well, over 2 years. And the Association of Detectorists is its legal entity at the moment, which is a not-for-profit community interest company. And just recently we've formed the asset-locked charity to that, which is the Detectorists Foundation. And I'll tell you more about that as we go on. You won't be able to see very well, but I thought I'd put this up here, that we've got fantastic support across the archaeological and heritage bodies in the UK. And I hope that after my talk today that you may see that there is a real need for an institute of detectorists. So, all we hear in the news is this, the media side of treasure and valuations. And I remember back in the 90s when I first got involved in metal detecting, that you look at magazines and there are lots of archaeological drawings of buckles and buttons and such. It's very different now to the sort of auction houses and valuations and such that you can see in the magazines of today. But to me, this pistol and musket shot changed my life. It was back in probably 1989 where I was diving on shipwrecks for a hobby, and I dived all around the UK. And on this particular dive, just off of Salcombe, it was a shallow dive, and if there's anybody who's been diving before, shallow dives, the second dive of the day can be quite awkward. I've got a dry suit on, so I'm sealed around my neck and my wrists. But in the shallows, it's very difficult to get your buoyancy, because if you're sort of turning head down, like I was because I'd seen these musket shots, the air goes into your boots, and if you're not careful, you're going up the long way around with your feet to the surface. But I was just determined because I'd seen this musket and pistol shot, and I was desperate to get hold of it. I'd never thought about this sort of link of tangible history in the past. It was just staring at me. And I'll explain why it is that it was so important to me to get this pistol and musket shot. Looking back at this, do I wish I'd left it there underneath that rock for other people to see? And I think the answer to that is actually, if these things were left in position and nobody was going to take them, I'd have much rather have left them there for all to see. But the reality is they were back to 1989 and I wanted them. But the reason I wanted them is that my interest has always been in the historic story behind events, and of course when it comes to shipwrecks it's quite easy then to go and do the research on the wreck before you do the dive, and it makes the world of difference. Instead of actually, obviously the visibility can be quite bad there at times, instead of just seeing lumps of metal down there, you're actually starting to know and understand why that wreck has gone down. But the night before the dive, I'd been reading up on the HMS Ramillies, and this was the actual wreck that I was on. And it was a very, very sad case. You've got this fantastic man of war ship which has been blockading the French ports, and there's a storm coming, it's leaking at the hull, and they've got to get back to the mainland. So as they got close to the mainland, the main chief navigator said, we've got to go into Plymouth Sound because as soon as we get lee of the wind there, we will be safe. So they made the manoeuvre, and as they did, they realised that they'd missed Plymouth Sound and was actually in a cove, and there's no way out. So they put an anchor to the stern, an anchor to the bow, and put this poor navigator up against the mast, loaded a pistol and shot him dead for making that mistake. So of course, when I'm down there diving and I'm seeing this pistol shot, all I can remember is the story behind and the fact that it could well have come from the same sort of bucket which they'd have had with all their musket and pistol shot on. And you know, 850 people died that day. And so this now tangible link that I got to the past, it's the story behind all of this which is of my main interest, and the fact that I could have something tangibly linked to that terrible night was quite important to me. But you live in Oxfordshire, you're a long way away from the sea, so I wanted to go and here we go. Why does he do these things? So I thought, well, it's so far to go to the coast, why don't I get involved in local history? And the thought came to me of metal detecting. You know, I found this musket shot, pistol shot, and you know, that may be of interest to me. So this was in the days before the internet, so you'd go down to the library and do your research. And I went to see Lord and Lady Sainseal and said, look, I'd love to do some metal detecting on the estate of the castle. And Lord Say said to me, well, we've had other people here before, nothing's ever really been found, but if you're interested, you know, go for it and have a look. And I said, well, my interest is actually, it's much more than just going around with a metal detector. I want to do my research, go into into the records and such. And although this image here is, you can find that within seconds now in the internet, it did take me some time in these library days. And but what was quite astonishing to me was that if anybody's been to Broughton Castle or seen it in the films in the past, you would know that this actual crossing across the moat comes across here somewhere. But what is really interesting is that second crossing, because that's not there, it's not been there for hundreds of years, and most people don't ever know that there was a crossing there, which to me seemed to be a really sensible place to go, and you think of that being the back door of the castle and doing some metal detecting in the routes in and out of that. I'm afraid this seems to be playing me up. So, there was going away from that second crossing and across the field where there was a leak going to an old mill, and I got my first signal and it was a hammered silver coin, so I was pretty damn pleased with that. And then I got another signal and then another signal, and over a period of time, as you can see at the top here, I've found a number of coins in the topsoil. But bearing in mind that this was now in the mid-90s, so before the Portable Antiquities Scheme, and but to me, there was just an instinct really to think I just daren't go any further than this. I could see there's, and I know there's things underneath it because I'm getting signals, but you know, I just didn't feel as if I was the person to be sort of digging down to find out where they were. So I went back to see the Lord Sainseal, and I said, look, I found these coins, but there's a coin at this point which is particularly interesting, and you know, it's quite fantastic. What should we do next? And he said, well, I'll get in contact with the Asmodean and then the county archaeologist, which they got in contact with me and said, look, what do you want to do? And I said, well, you know, I know there's that there's other coins there, and I know through the treasure trove, or the previous, before 1996 treasure trove, that the idea is to see whether anything has been lost or not, or whether it's actually been purposely buried. And I've explained that what I could do, if they wanted me to, is that I could work down in layers and try and find the coins and then see if they've been purposely buried. And the archaeologist said, look, we're very happy that you're doing the right thing here, and allowed me to do the excavating of the coins. Now, of course, jump forward 20 years or so, and we can see that really detectorists should always be stopping at this point and never going into the subsoil. And but it was this was early days as such, and they felt confident that I was trying to do things for the right reasons. And but I put on here over 370 years of biotubation. I mean, it's fascinating to think that actually right down in that little dark point there was where I'd found the darkened soil mound where it had obviously been deposited, these 16 coins, whether it was in cloth or leather, which has deteriorated over the years. But incredible to think that we're talking about probably 2.5, 3 foot down at this point, that over 370 years they'd actually migrated and moved when the biotubation back up to this point. And to me, this is key to understanding metal detecting as we're going forward, because quite often you see where detectorists are finding coins in the topsoil and then starting to sort of dig down through it, that actually I heard even just this week that somebody's gone back to a site and found more coins, and the biotubation itself could be very important in how coins and that make their way up to the surface. So there is me finding this. I ended up in court. So the next thing I had is the police knocking on my door, and I was up in the dock of Oxford Crown Court. So I think people like Black Panther have been there before me in times. But the judge, who was acting as coroner, turned around to the jury and said, "You've had a pretty awful morning. You've seen some pretty awful things. But now we're going to determine whether these coins, which have been found by Keith Westcott, is treasure trove or not." And he asked me my views, and I said, "Yeah, most certainly treasure trove." My point or objective was to try and determine whether it was treasure trove by looking to see if they'd been purposely buried. But this again is where I'm coming back to how detectorists, archaeologists, and the media have got to try and work together to get away from this monetary value and gold, and it's worth £1 million and such. The history behind and the knowledge you can get, the research you can do, is worth so much more than just some cheap sort of headline for a day in the national press. So the reason I was so really astounded by some of the coins I found on that first day was that I found patagons and ducatoons minted in the Netherlands, Spanish coins, so Spanish treasure, as you want to call it then, in Oxfordshire. What was that all about? Well, at the end of the Battle of Edge Hill, the Royalists went to take Banbury Castle, and on the way they took siege of Broughton Castle, which was a parliamentarian stronghold. It was thought at the inquest that a soldier may well, at the point of the siege, have gone out beforehand, buried this to go back later. But it wasn't until about a year later that British Numismatic Society said, "Oh, hold on a minute, these coins, ducatoons and patagons, were perhaps not around at that time." That was 16 November 1642. But we do know that in the following year, Queen Henrietta Maria docked at Bridlington, and she worked her way down through the country, through York, Newark, Stratford-upon-Avon, and met with King Charles at the Battle of Hedgehill site, and was escorted then to Roxton Abbey in Oxfordshire, which is literally just around the corner really from Broughton Castle. And the British Numismatic Society was saying that not only were those coins probably not in the country at the time of the siege of the castle, but we know that the only time these coins have been found before is actually following the route that Queen Henrietta Maria took when she was heading down to meet Charles I and then go back to Oxford. So, there can't be many hoards out there where you've got this amount of research was got all the way back to be able to say, well, these were probably part of the the Queen's coins, the entourage of Queen Henrietta Maria. But again, I think a great story and much more exciting than the headlines of silver treasure being found. So there they are at the Ashmolean, and if anybody is going in there soon, then the hoard's been in the Ashmolean for the last 10 years or more. But what I'm trying to sort of bring to this is that there is another approach involved in metal detecting, and it doesn't have to be this treasure hunting side of things. And I do a lot of talks now to historical societies, and some of the things that I've found in the past and the stories behind them are you can see in people's faces are just as exciting as some of the more important finds. And what I am really pleased to say is that this in 1996-97 was just a handful. It turned out to be the very last case in common law treasure trove, which is quite interesting in itself, which was, I was filmed by television going into court with this, and the press releases, I'm pleased to say, is saying, I've got no interest in keeping this whatsoever. I'm not doing this because I want to find anything which I can get any monetary reward for. I'd already said to Lord Say that I didn't want anything I found. Whatever I found goes to him, and he would then decide how we went forward to, we went through to the Ashmolean, and then through the treasure trove to the British Museum and back again. It says here, I always wanted them to go on display for everyone to see. I'm not into private collections, I'm not a treasure hunter, I'm looking for some things which have got historical value or significance because I'm interested in history. So I'm very pleased that I found that again the other day, because some people will say, oh, it's just sort of jumping on some sort of an idea. But this was written in 1997, so my sort of principles back then are as they are now. But of course, that as an object generally getting anywhere between 100 110 people coming to these historical society talks, which is fantastic. It seems to be breaking all local records at the moment, which is good. But nobody's come to know what that is. And when I say to people, well, actually, that was so commonplace in the Middle Ages that it's no different to the thought of go and get your Wellington boots. But of course, in the days when you wanted to keep your feet out of the mire, it didn't matter whether you're out in the marshes or in York going through the shambles and want to cross from one path to another and go through what we know was all deposited in that way. So when people actually see a foot pattern for the first time and realise that this was an everyday part of our heritage, that in itself is really interesting to people. Jettons. I mean, the one explained that a jeton, it's not currency, it can't be spent, but it was actually used to, let's say you've got your estate and you're deciding what taxes are going to be paid, who owns what and how many houses are owned in such. that you'd have the exchequer board, and that the jetton would be your counter for being able to work out who owes what and when, and where the Chancellor of the Exchequer got its name first from. So again, not valuable items, but of great historic interest to people. And oh, come on. I bet now I'm just going to move forward. No, good. So I love this one. This is when I first found one of these medieval compact mirrors. I could never quite get my head around why anybody would have such a tiny, it's about the size of a 2p piece as a compact. And so I always was looking for more and more information on this. And then I found that there are thoughts out there that there was a reason for this compact mirror, and in fact, I think I know Michael is in here, and Michael's you've written a paper on this, haven't you, Michael, on medieval compact mirrors. But Gutenberg, the days of the printing press, the 15th century, he, as well as inventing the printing press, had a really good side business of making these compact mirrors. And the reason is it was a pilgrim mirror. And the pilgrim would go off and set off on his journey, get into the cathedral 50 miles away as such, and to get close to the church and its past, the first thing you do is go and have a look at the relic. And the idea was that you could actually open this mirror and capture the image of the relic and close it down, and then take it back home, and if there's somebody ill, or if you just wanted to sort of almost bless your own house, you could then open up and release this image into your house. So again, these stories are fascinating, and this is what metal detecting should be all about. Because there are the fantastic finds, but then the stories behind them are fantastic as well. But unfortunately, we always seem to see the value, the monetary sort of value of these items. Now, I started to write a book about the Queen's coins. And the more research I was doing, and the more fascinating, Queen Henrietta Maria, a most fascinating woman, and the things that she got involved in, it just got me hungry again to go out and look for more. But I'd known of this sarcophagus burial in the British Castle estate for 25 years or so, and I often thought that Romano-British, so from native stock in her 30s, slender build, who was this woman? She must have been such a high status person to have such a high status burial. And this was found in 1963, the year that I was born. The plough had ploughed up the top of the sarcophagus. The skeleton as such was taken to the Ashmolean, and then she was reinterned back in the actual sarcophagus. And I always felt that I got something driving me to try and find a reason why she was there. I think the archaeologists felt that she wasn't too far off of the Roman road, not too far from the settlement. But for me, it wasn't the opulence of burials where you wanted to show off the sort of the size of the sort of the burial as such as you're going into the Roman cities. This was just too far off and slanted on a slope, which was you would struggle to see from the road. And so over a period of time, I thought, no, I'm sure she's there for a reason, and I think she's actually looking over her home. So it got to over a number of weeks, and I said to my wife, I can't stand this any longer. I'm going to go out and I'm going to look around the area. Nothing to do with metal detecting, just using basic archaeological principles of topography. Is there what is natural, what is man-made? Is there water available through streams and springs, south-southeast facing, those sorts of things. I thought that within 3 or 4 hours I might actually get a few clues. But within 20 minutes I've gone through a hedge and I was looking down a field where I could see the field was actually terraced down in front of me going towards a stream. A huge spring to the side of it, a platform dropping off north to south, and it was enormous. Oh, crikey. This could be what I'm looking for, but what is it? It's so big. Is it a settlement as such? So, I'm going to put that down. I'm going to use this. Do the obvious thing before you go out looking at any aerial images and such. There was nothing that I could see as such. But when I went back home, I could see back in 1996 on an aerial image that there was some sort of a shape to that. And so I went back the next day, and it was stubble, and I managed to sort of get my foot and see into the earth, and couldn't really find much apart from where an animal had been digging. And as I got across to there, the first thing I found was Hypocaust flutile. And of course, as soon as I saw Hypocaust flutile, I knew, yes, okay, this is going to be of interest. That was the magnetometry survey that we had done off the back of my report to Lord and Lady Sainseal, that I think I found something of interest. So a courtyard villa, that was your great big sort of plinth as such as it was sort of sat around, and incredibly an old hall off the back of it, off the bottom of it. But there we got. That gives you this sort of size of, or a scale to it, and that scale is Buckingham Palace. So if I just show you again, that's Buckingham Palace, that's your courtyard villa, and we think it's quite probably in the top 5 largest courtyard villas ever to be discovered in the UK, and I'm very proud as a detectorist, using my sort of principles and thoughts and theories, that I thought it was there and went out to look, because of course the main courtyard villas were found in the 1800s. Chedworth was the gamekeeper who lost his ferret and was digging out his ferret, and Braden in the Isle of Wight, it was a post going down for a sheep enclosure, and I think Bignor was again a plough. So again, this is all interrelated to the idea of having an institute which recognises that there is great work which can be done by detectorists. There's a lot of bad things that are done as well, and we all know that. But do we just sort of accept that there's bad things and just allow them to continue, or do we say, look, we've got to start somewhere, and it's a bit late now in some ways, but let's get sort of stuck into this now and see what we can do. And what I love to see in this image here, we've taken the plotted positions of the coins, separated into centuries, overlaid them across the magnetometry, and I think actually, if you took away that magnetometry, you'd have a pretty good idea that there was something of interest going on in the shape alone. And this is all in the plough soil. So my sort of take on this is that we can't just discount an artefact found in the plough soil decoupled from any real context or so. And in fact, I think that back of a couple of sites that I've detected on in the past, I thought, oh God, I'd love to be able to go back 20 years now and plot out exactly where I found these things. But you know, as I say, we've got to start somewhere. That actually is the Trajan, and that coin is silver denarius of 99 AD, which is that red one there. You know, we bring in the archaeologists, and the first thing which frightened the life out of me is that we know where the villa is, we've got all the dating material, and the archaeologists are going to find it now with the JCB. And yeah, bang, yeah, we found it. Well, it sent shivers through me because, you know, but anyway, I'm going to whiz by those and just say that is my sort of my past involved in metal detecting, and I'm hoping that people think that there was a relevance to the work that I've done over these years. And I talk about the next discovery here because this part of a marble carved sarcophagus is the only other part of the sarcophagus known in North Oxfordshire. And you know, it gets under my skin that it's there. I want to find out why, and particularly because that's my house. and that's where it was found.
Yes.
To run over. 10 minutes. I went and did a 10-week course at Oxford called Archaeology in Practice with Dr. Wendy Morrison. And there was things that I learnt on that course, and I thought to myself, crikey, why on earth aren't we being told this as detectorists? Because we're often told that it's a destructive method, a destructive practice. And of course, detectorists do see the JCBs being used, and they think, well, hold on, I'm so careful in where I do it. And then, you know, archaeologists go through the topsoil as if whatever is in that topsoil is not of interest. And it wasn't until I started to actually be taught about the Harris matrix that I started to understand the complexities of an archaeologist. You know, how on earth did you get your head round that we've got some, you know, medieval coins, somehow in silver, you know, underneath Roman coins or Roman artifacts or Roman floors, and you know, that I think was really important because, you know, in some ways it's just not fair to say to detectorists that, you know, you just don't know what you're doing. You're making, you know, an absolute mess of things out there without actually explaining why. And so when I decided then to try and put a course together at the University of Oxford, I put this course together and I'll go straight on to it. There we are, back in November of last year. The first ever course for metal detecting related to archaeological projects. 40 places. It was oversubscribed. We had people from all over the country saying we'd love to do this, but we can't get you know, to Oxford. And lucky enough, we got an overall approval of 95% for the day. CIFA endorsed it, and everybody got a CIFA CPT certificate. You know, I think this is a great move forward. I just wish in many ways that this had happened 20 years ago. Also, there is another course, and it's in America, on the estate of the fourth President James Madison, and that they gave me a scholarship to go over to participate on the course here. And what is really fascinating there is what we're looking at is the spread of nails across there, because you know what we've been able to do and what they've done in the past is actually see where the slave quarters were just by actually determining where these nails were. And surprisingly, the fantastic house at Montpellier, that was much bigger, owned by the DuPont family, and then it came back to a heritage foundation, and they brought it back to the days of James Madison by the nails. because if you had any nail which was slightly modern, away from the more iron type, then they would strip out that and stripped it back down just through nails. So the work that they're doing over in the States in trying to build bridges between archaeologists and detectorists, it is very much aligned to what I'm trying to do. The Detectorists Foundation that we've now set up as a charity linked to the Community Interest Company, the principle there is that if you are as a detectorist out on the field and you find an in situ find, something of real importance, and you need to know what to do, it could be a rally. This is found. It's not straightforward to know who is going to actually professionally excavate that in situ find, and quite often it's left down to fellows to try and sort this issue out. Whereas what we're asking now is for people to donate into this charity, so we've got funds which are available to bring an FLO in, or the number of archaeologists spread around the country who know that they can be called upon at a short call to come in and do the excavation and can be paid to do it. And methodology, standard and guidance. This is so important that if we're now going to try and say, well, archaeologists haven't utilised metal detecting in perhaps a way they could have done in the past. I went to see the archaeologist, the project manager who'd done Westgate in Oxford, which is the biggest archaeological project ever. And they had an on-site museum for the public to go and look at. And at the end of his talk, I said, did you use any metal detectors? And he said, we didn't. And it's such a shame because it would have found so much more. And what a shame for that it can't be utilised. But this is a great example here of a recent rally. That was seen some months ago, where on the rally they decided the best way to deal with this was to get the JCB in and start digging for it. And I think the horde was spread between numerous detectorists all trying to get in there. This was the one last weekend. Look at the difference. Detectorists will say themselves, well, we don't need any education, we know what we've got to go and do. And archaeologists may say, well, these people don't know what they do, but who is actually explaining exactly what you should do? And the person in charge of this rally has worked very closely with the FLO. I've been in touch with him as well, and so he's going into this knowing that if anything, he actually tells everybody before they start the rally, you must know and understand what you're going to do if you find something like this. Down tools, call us in, we'll. So that there's lots of good reasons behind it. I'm going to whiz past that and just finish off with so what we're trying to do here, well, first we're trying to get the metal detector actually recognised as a useful tool there, and actually try and get the detectorists to be welcomed into the archaeological team, to be seen as a useful part of the team. We've had this crazy situation that the code of practice is being put together and put out there, and the only people who don't endorse the code of practice are the metal detecting groups out there. So the groups or the bodies which are recognising it aren't doing any metal detecting. We've got to try and work together where we're bringing archaeologists and detectorists together. And this is the point. This institute will be made up of archaeological bodies and detectorists. The steering group will all be actually a joint group where we're all working together. We want to promote the archaeological values and educate to archaeological principles. develop some standards and guidance to be recognised across the country with a bank of detectorists which are all qualified. They know exactly what they should be doing as and when they're called upon. And support the Portable Antiquities Scheme and say that just to actually become part of the Institute, you've got to record and you've got to comply with the code of practice. But you might think, well, this is all well and good, but where is the take-up of this when it comes to the archaeological bodies? And this is so important. ALGO is keen to support your initiatives. We see the proposed training courses as a way of embedding metal detector use into professional practice. It will be particularly important to include clear understanding of archaeological evaluation and mitigation recording in the planning process, and to ensure that detectorists working in these projects work to a clearly defined specification, such as you have outlined, to support the aims of the project. ALGO can certainly help with support and guidance on this aspect, spread the awareness of the training and encourage the use of standard specifications among our members. And I've had now a similar statement from Fame, which is great. We're just waiting for that to be released. And if anybody wants to see our supporting references, from the Portable Antiquities Scheme to CIFA to CBA, and the great news out of all of this is that at the beginning of this year, Historic England said that they would actually stage fund the establishment of the Institute. So the actual establishment of it will be done on a final point with heritage funding, but through these processes of project design, business plan is funded by Historic England, and Mike Hayworth of the CBA is involved in working through with me through that process. So my thoughts of giving this talk and just showing you my background and knowing that we've got discussions coming up now, that there's so much more that has been done to this point, but I'm hoping that that will come up in the questions. So thank you all for listening to me.
Questions right. Thank you, Keith. Can I invite questions, please, one at a time? Just put your hand up if you'd like to ask. Dan.
I just wanted to say, as a commercial archaeologist, and I've been for the last 16, 17 years, you seem to speak more as an archaeologist than most of the professional archaeologists I meet.
Oh.
You talk about context and stratigraphy and Harris matrix and values beyond economic value. So, coming from someone from a metal detecting background, that's extremely rewarding from my point of view.
Right.
You, on a specific point, you talk at the very last, I think last slide of the slide, you talked about the idea of using the metal as a proper archaeological tool. In the companies that I work for, it is written into our approved project designs that the metal detector is taken out to a commercial site. This is a document that's obviously approved by the local planning authority archaeologist. We have to take it out and have to use it. On every single project I've ever done as a commercial archaeologist, that metal detector has stayed in its bag in the back of the van. It's never been used. And it's partially because, well, I haven't got a clue how to use one.
Well, the interesting thing from ALGO's perspective is that they are so supportive of detectorists being trained as experts to give that support to archaeologists, rather than archaeologists taking up and trying to sort of work with a metal detector which isn't their sort of principal interest as such. So that is great. That sort of supports very much of what they're saying, and I hope that this bank that we can build across the country, so that when an archaeologist needs somebody that they can rely on, and to make sure that the sort of methodologies and standards are the same in Cornwall as they are in Cumbria. That's what we're trying to achieve on that.
I'd like to see a pool, a database.
Yes.
That we can call upon locally.
Yes.
As and when you need to.
Yeah.
Obviously, on a lot of commercial sites, there is the two big issues of time and money. And quite often, if we are looking for a metal detector, is through spoil heaps. It's not. You showed the Roman villa site where you were able to plot the coinage. Well, you would only see that once it's in the spoil heap.
Yeah.
You wouldn't
Yeah.
see that in its in
No.
situ, in its original location.
And the problem with the spoil heap, as we know, there's so much huge volume there, you're only just actually looking at the outside of it. But when you read an archaeologist's book, it will then say that actually if you try and separate through layers, I mean, where have I got it? I think I've got it on... Yes, here we go. Yeah, I didn't read this because it was, I was getting a bit tight for time, but in the Techniques of Archaeological Excavation, it states that if each bucketful of soil is sieved individually, its general contents will be known. Spoils should be sieved from each layer or feature independently. Now, we're talking now of buckets being JCB buckets, but the same principle, if you're working on commercial projects where we know that the JCB just tend to go through the subsoil, perhaps down to natural at times. There is a scientific approach that we can bring to this, and a lot of detectorists would say, we don't need to be educated to turn it on and go over a spoil heap. But no, there's much more that we can do if we understand it as a scientific instrument and sort of process.
Great, thank you, Keith. That's good. Now, can I ask who you are?
Roger Minty, metal detectorist, Southern Region. When you said that the two main metal detecting bodies hadn't endorsed the code of practice, I think we can say, quite frankly, they don't represent the majority of detectorists.
Interesting.
When we're talking about the NCMD, I used to go to their AGMs and OGMs for 7 years, and things have gone wrong up there. The Southern Region, the Midland Region have been virtually kicked out. The Trevor Austin, the General Secretary, of course, died in 2016.
Yes.
And I think that if this had all come up 3 or 4 years ago, it would have been different. As for FID, well,
Sorry, sir. What's FID?
Federation of Independent Detectorists.
Right.
I don't think, to be honest with you, that they've really got much of a grasp of what's going on. But what I will add to that is that all the farms that I detect on, they know all about the code of practice. They say you will do not only Mike Lewis's code of practice, but also you will do my code of practice tagged onto it. And then I say, and I will then tag my code of practice on with the scripture. So I think we can say that responsible detectorists who want to keep their sites, definitely you obey that code.
Yes, yeah. Well, it's interesting to see how, especially through forums, that there is a new I wouldn't say feeling out there. There's a new approach coming, I think, because a lot of people do want to be respected for what they are. I mean, when I had the television cameras asking to film me going into court, they wanted me out in the field with a metal detector, and I wouldn't do it because I was saying that I don't want to be portrayed in the way you want to portray me. As far as I'm concerned, that there are metal detectorists who should be seen as experts in their own right. That they are so knowledgeable, so dedicated into their research, and it's just a shame that large numbers, as we know nowadays, that there are large numbers of detectorists, that perhaps someone such as the MCMD might have a slightly different approach to what many detectorists would like to do. And I think the Institute as a body gives the detectorists not just a chance to be recognised, it gives us aspirational levels to reach through our membership, can change through the educational levels that we actually put into place. And we'll end up as practitioners, consultant practitioners on commercial sites, brought in like a geophysics team.
Yes, I mean, I think what you're saying is you're showing leadership, which is much needed.
It's good.
Yeah, that's great, thank you. I'd like another question, please. Can we get Question, sir?
I was just going to say,
Sorry,
Tim Pestell, Norwich Castle Museum.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I think with the business of archaeology recording on the spoil heaps, most of that is down to the brief that's set to start with. If the brief is set that detecting is done on the field before excavation or trial work starts, then you get that localised material.
Yes.
And that's down to the curators.
Absolutely.
But I think with Algeo as well saying that that they want to sort of support and endorse this through county archaeologists, and now with Fame as well coming into this as well as from the commercial archaeologist side of it. That there's two sides to what we're trying to do. Is one, sort of raise the game on metal detecting so that we are useful to archaeologists and to heritage as a whole, but also with hobbyist detectorists to try and get to a point where everybody sees things slightly different to they do now. At the end of the day, things are found out there. We know that, I think you mentioned this before, that the volume which is found, and museums just haven't got the opportunity to be able to deal with that actual volume to put on display and such. We need to know those private collections in as much as if it's all being recorded through the Portable Antiquities Scheme, and then the information is there, and then when unfortunately detectorists are passing on, it's been around for a long time now on metal detecting, we want to make sure that these all are utilised in the future, rather than occasionally people don't know what to do with it, and it's all, that was dad's stuff and chucked it in the bin as such.
Okay, thank you. Another question, please. Can I raise another question for you? Any question? Please, and who are you, sir?
I'm Kate Adcock from the Association for Roman Archaeology. In fact, we published Roger Ainsley's geophysical survey in ARA News. I'm wondering, I have an awful lot of questions for you actually, but you're envisaging this Institute for Detectorists. Who will actually pay? Will it be to do the training? Will it be the people, the detectorists themselves? Or will they be paid? One of the great things about detectoring is the social mix, the fact that people who are able to engage on a very intimate level with local history, as you say. This seems to be a problem if you're going to be then asking people to pay to get your qualifications. You're going to exclude an awful lot of very good detectorists. I do hear detectorists saying about that we don't really want to pay to do these things. They're quite happy to spend £1,500 on equipment, and when you think of the biggest hobby in the country is fishing, so fishing is very much a very much working class hobby to have, where all the equipment is very expensive, but they don't think anything of having to pay for a rod license and then have separate local clubs that they need to pay to be part of. But it's a difficult one, this, when it comes to the paying side of it, because with the Treasure Act revision as it is now, mentioning that education could become much more important, do we actually then get funding via the heritage funds as such to try and actually pay for this work to be done, this education to be given, and bring down the cost of a training session? The one that I did at Oxford was £67 for the day. I've been to Oxford to do day courses. I did stratigraphic analysis. That cost me £220 for a day. It's dramatically lower than you'd ever expect archaeological courses to be as such. But I would really like to be doing a sort of a tour around clubs myself, to sort of talk about what I've done in the past and share the thought of how we can move forward in a more archaeological sort of principled way. That may be something that we can get funded perhaps.
and you know, Portable Antiquities as well have got a good part to play in this. A good part to play in this when it comes to you know, education, and it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because you know, the thing is, if we don't do something about it now, and we've got anything between 30,000 detectorists to the government figures now, so about 600 or so thousand detectorists have used a metal detector over a year period, 2017-18. What do we do? Do we just sort of sit back and say, well, detectorists are going out and having huge rallies and not recording things properly? A Portable Antiquities Scheme don't come along to those rallies even now, because it's taken a stance to say, well, it's got to be done properly. Well, I think the Institute is a good chance to work with the Portable Antiquities Scheme and saying we will get in there amongst it all to try and change mindsets and show how important the recording, and especially spatial recording. I mean, that magnetometry survey diagram showing the coin positions shows you how important that the actual spatial contextual landscape is. And we've got to be able to talk to detectorists about it. And certainly I've got to say that the response that I've had from detectorists about this has been, the people who've got in contact with me has been extremely good. Through forums it's not so good, but as actually people who want to be involved in this and see themselves much more than finding a random loss. I know you've got lots of more questions to throw me on that.
I'll take one more question. Does anyone else want to ask a question? Otherwise I'll try Kate again. Sir. Oh, sorry, who are you, sir?
I'm John Locke. One of the basically, I think one of the problems with detectorists is actually where they go and how they find their sites. How are you dealing with things like LiDAR data being universally available now?
Yeah.
I mean, I can go and look at, is it houseprices.co?
Yes, that's right, yes.
It takes you straight into perfectly good meter resolution.
Yeah. And of course now you've got Archaeology as a site where buy a detector one day, put in your postcode into the site the next day, and it's telling you sites that not even the landowners know are on their land. And it is, that is to me one of the biggest problems of all. And I know that I can't go too far in saying that this is how metal detecting should be in the future, but what I can do, I can try and support ideas like saying, well, if detectorists do like getting together and it's quite a sociable thing, an event for detectorists to come together like this, are very interested in what other people have found and the local history and such, then the more that we can work with local history societies and community archaeologists, so that one of these types of sites, an archaeological feature which is in somebody's field that they don't know is there, but we can actually work together and start to try and do anything we can to protect that site. First thing is that the landowner knows it's there. I mean, I've got one instance where I went to see the landowner, who was the managing director of Credit Suisse, so a very influential man, lived there for 25 years in this sort of big estate, and I showed him the most incredible features which have come from aerial photographs. He said, my God, I've never known it's there. And I went to 4 other local landowners and farmers with similar sites which have been brought up from the Swindon Aerial Archives. They don't know it's even on their site, but Archaeology does know it's there, so the inexperienced detectorists can find out by putting in a postcode and the next minute knocking on the door to somebody who doesn't know what's on his own land.
Thank you.
Do you want to find one more back at me from your list of...
Yes, Kate, did you want to...
Okay, well, I suppose over the past, since December, I've been working on a project to record detecting finds every second Sunday, come rain, snow, which detectorists seem to love for some reason, on a site of great importance. We have, for the 4 months before we were involved, myself and 2 archaeologists, doing this recording on a totally voluntary basis. Before we were involved, for the 4 months before that, before we knew this detecting was going on, I think there are 30 finds that were logged with the PAS. Since we've been involved, we go out there every time the detectorists are there. We write down the spatial data. Obviously, we photograph all the finds. We record them as best we can in the conditions that we are in, a barn with no walls, basically. And for the amount of, for our contribution, we have recorded over 600 finds. Now,
we need 1,000 of you, don't we, really?
Well, it's a horrendously labour-intensive process recording all this stuff.
Yes.
And how much has been lost from the detecting that happened for the 4 months that we weren't involved, where there are 30 objects on the PAS. I'm sure it's down a lot to the detectorists not knowing maybe what to record, or maybe the FLO just not having the capacity to record, even if they brought all, these hundreds of, as you say, nails, rivets, all that sort of stuff, and other stuff that is, more PAS treasure type material.
Sure, yes, yeah.
But for the history of the site, which I feel very strongly about, I'm prepared to do this every fortnight.
Well, it's heartbreaking, isn't it? Because we know that we've only got one chance at this.
Exactly.
The rate that metal detecting is going on across the country, that if we sit back another 10 years, I don't know where we're going to go with it. But it's not a huge jump from metal detecting and picking up an artefact to actually saying why that is so important that we have that information and knowledge, and trying to get the local history societies and community archaeologists trying to perhaps sit in and do something similar to what you're doing, because they're so want to look after an interesting site local to them.
And one thing that really annoys me is that I'm spending money in order to do this. I'm paying to go to the site, I'm paying to stay overnight, I'm giving up every other weekend to do this, and to pay for printing the photographs. I get no money from anywhere. And these things that they're finding are worth hundreds and thousands of pounds.
Do those, sorry to butt in, do those things get sold then, Kate?
No, not yet, because they're going through the treasure process.
And whose aegis are you doing the work?
I can discuss. I mean, we've been in touch. We've been in close contact with the FLO and the anti-archaeologist and everything. And it's a specific sort of coming together. We know the landowners. Yes. We know people who know the site intimately, and they can give the added value because they know the site so well that they understand the significance of all these objects that are coming up. Somebody who doesn't have that sort of knowledge of the site would not know the relevance of these seemingly insignificant things that are coming up. And, we've got to treat these sites with massive respect.
We've got to.
And also, it's been great working with the Detectorists. It's been great working with this wonderful mix of people who go out, and they are so excited when they find something. And the people I'm working with, they gave a talk to the club and they explained the relevance of the site, again all in their own time. And they're really enthusing the Detectorists with their knowledge of the site. And it's, when you get people coming into our wallpapering table with camera stand on it and papers blowing about in the wind and all this sort of thing, and you hear, Chris has got a denarius. There's, there's one coming in oh, there's this coming in, you know, you're going to see it later on, and that's really good. I haven't found anything except a bit of a tractor, but I mean, you know,
you
and
need to.
it's a real privilege to work with them.
We need to harness that, don't we? Because
so
there is such an interest and you know, transfer responsibility and you know, an ethical approach about this. It's not as far off as some people might think it is. You know, that they're poles apart. I think. But the idea of actually working in a group, I think, is a possible way forward for everyone. Where you've got, you know, someone like yourself and your colleagues, and who can. The trouble is, quite often detectorists are just out there somewhere in the field. You know, the farmer knows he's there, nobody else does, and you know, what I found is that one history society to the next, if there's a hill in between them, they don't know anything which is going on the other side of the hill. We need to try and interconnect with it all.
Thank you, that's great, Mike. Okay, we're going to move forward to the next stage, which I think involves Jude coming forward and Mike, Tim Pestell. Tim, are you going to talk, sir?
Yeah.
Would you like to come forward to the table? Go. All right, I'll try you correctly. I think we're going to have a panel up here. Are you talking as well, Mike?
Yeah, I was saying just a few words.
Come up here, Mark. And